Good morning, everyone. It's great to see you this Lord's Day morning. We are looking at the end of the book of 2 Kings and the end of the book of 2 Chronicles, which comes at long last, right? We've been in Kings and Chronicles for quite some time. So we kind of see this tragic ending of the people of God this morning as we study the final Kings as they go into captivity. And we'll touch on Lamentations. As you can see, I had quite a stinger there at the end of your study where question 9 required you to read all of Lamentations and a few Psalms. So I hope you enjoyed that study. But we just are trying to finish by the end of the quarter and make sure we have some time to study the book of Daniel and touch on the book of Ezekiel as well. So I've actually got my Bible open at the moment to Habakkuk 3. We want to touch on that briefly, and then we'll be jumping back over to Kings and Chronicles. All right, as I mentioned, would love to spend even more time in Habakkuk, this very short minor prophet, but the last question on your Habakkuk study gets to one of the most beautiful texts, I think, in the entire Bible. And we know that Habakkuk had asked God questions, how long are you going to overlook the sin that's around him? And the answer was not very long. He's sending Babylon. And then he said, but why would you approve of Babylon? Are we not more righteous than they? And his answer was, they're going to get what's coming to them as well. And so Habakkuk accepts these things. He has a very faithful attitude. If you're in Habakkuk 3 and want to just look at 16, 17, 18, and 19, some of that is here on the board. This passage, although the fig tree shall not blossom, neither shall fruit be on the vines, the labor of the olive shall fail, and the fields shall yield no meat. The flock shall be cut off from the fold, and there be no herd in the stalls, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will joy in the God of my salvation. What a faithful statement he makes. I asked you on that last question about verse 16, the prior verse where he says, I must wait quietly for the day of distress. What are some days of distress that we may face? He describes it in the terms that would have been very distressing in his day. There's no fruit, there's no cattle, there's nothing. They've got absolutely nothing. And yet his attitude was, I'm still going to put my trust in God. What kinds of distresses might we face where we would need to muster that same attitude? Dad?
Invasion by other countries, terrorism, things of that nature, and we can't really do anything to control those things. So we have to put our faith and trust in God that He will allow this country to continue as it is, and we need to pray for that to happen, to be able to continue with the freedoms and the blessings that we enjoy in this country.
That's a good point. Yeah, sometimes our right to vote gives us a false sense of control, as if we think we can determine the outcome of things with our single vote among 400 million Americans. Doesn't mean you shouldn't. Every vote counts. But does that mean you're controlling the outcome? No, we still are going to suffer whatever outcome the Lord ultimately decrees. And so, yes, it may get bad on a national level in our lifetime. What else, Shirley? Yeah, on a much smaller scope, right? You can be living in a blessed land and be dealing with daily heartache and sorrow. Feeling just the same way that Habakkuk is describing here, because a loved one has passed, or there's daily sickness that doesn't seem to be getting any better. Maybe it's Alzheimer's, such a brutal disease where the person is gone but still here, even becoming violent and acting in ways that he or she would never have acted in this life, and you continue to serve but continue to suffer while dealing with helping that person. Yeah, so many things. Loss of a child. We know some who've dealt with that great sorrow, losing a child. It may be a loss of a job where you start to wonder, how are we going to get cattle back in the stalls, right? I don't know how I'm going to provide for my family because of whatever the loss is. And so you see Habakkuk's wonderful attitude, this idea of exulting in the Lord. Why would he continue to exult in the Lord? Didn't the Lord bring these things upon him? It reminds me of what Peter said, right? When Peter said, or Jesus asked him, will you also go away? What did he say? To whom shall we go? Yeah, there is no one else. The Lord God is the provider. He is, in here in Habakkuk 3:19, it says, the Lord God is my strength. Some of the other passages we were studying this week, like in Lamentations, you see, the Lord is my portion, which we sing in Be Thou My Vision. You are my portion. You know, when I first saw that in the song, I wasn't quite sure what he was referring to, but it's this idea of, you know, well, how much am I going to get? What am I going to receive? Am I going to get my daily bread? Well, if we have the Lord, we can make it. It's going to be enough. Just like he told Paul, my grace is sufficient for you. Randy?
I think we talked about death of a loved one, but the difficult thing with Christians is sometimes spiritual death of a loved one. We family members fall away, and we try so hard to get them back. Even our sometimes children. Right now we've got the war in Ukraine going on, and we have family members that are affected by that. So,
yes.
And that's kind of what was going on here. We had, they were being destroyed by another nation.
That's right. We're blessed and insulated from a lot of that type of warfare with oceans protecting us on both sides, but not everyone in the world is so blessed. They're dealing with loss of territory and freedom and life on a daily basis. So certainly, these texts should be an encouragement to us and show us that we can continue to trust God. We don't have to lose our faith when we are challenged by things in this life. It says, he makes me walk on my high places. And so we can continue to serve God faithfully. All right, let's flip on to our next lesson. I put up this timeline a couple weeks ago, and so this is the timeline of the entire Bible that we'll use in various classes to understand kind of where we are. And so you can see these 3 steps down into Babylonian captivity. That's right where we are in our study today. And there's going to be 3 steps up, conveniently, of them returning back to the land. And that'll be studied in our next quarter, which then gets us to this ... which is the period between the Testaments, which we call the 400 years of silence, because he's not sending prophets to the people. And then he ends his silence in the New Testament with the Gospels and, of course, the angels coming and proclaiming that a son will be born to us. So the life of Christ and the church age, or the early church. So we're getting toward the end of our 3.5 or 4 year study through the Bible. As we kind of zoom in a bit, you can see a few dates. And so these 3 phases of going into Babylonian captivity are something that I learned years ago, but then as I go hunting in my Bible for, okay, where do I see the 3 steps down? It's a little hard to piece together. And even in Waldron's material, I found it a little bit hard to piece together, and he was organizing it and helped a great deal to help us. But it's in a lot of different places. That first deportation is kind of mainly described in the book of Daniel, which we'll study some more next week. The second two deportations are the ones that are given the most information in 2 Kings and 2 Chronicles. You can see some of the kings. There's essentially 4 kings on this descent into captivity, and we'll talk about those this morning. So question 1, Jehoahaz. And adding to some confusion here, you're going to get some different names for some of the same kings as usual. But Jehoahaz or Shallum was made king after Josiah's death. Remind me, how did Josiah die? Anybody remember that story? Clarissa?
He went and challenged Nico, even though he shouldn't have, and he died with an arrow shot.
Right. On the plains of Megiddo, Nico was headed north to Carchemish to battle the Assyrians, and God had told him to go there, but Josiah didn't know that, and so he opposes him. So Josiah dies. Josiah was a good king, and all of these kings that we now talk about are his direct descendants. Most of them his sons, one of them his grandson. And so as he dies, the Jews in Jerusalem appoint his son as king, and it's Jehoahaz. So Pharaoh Necho, though, who is defeated at Carchemish and now is headed back home, frustrated that the Jews had slowed him down, that Josiah had slowed him down and led to this failure, he then deposes the king that they had put in place. Says, no, I'm taking him with me, and puts another man in place. Who's the king that he puts in place? So Jehoahaz is only on the throne there for 3 months, and it says that he appoints Jehoiakim. If you're in 2 Chronicles 36, you get some of that detail. It says, 2 Chronicles 36, verse 4, the king of Egypt made Eliakim, his brother, king over Judah and Jerusalem, and changed his name to Jehoiakim. And so Jehoiakim is set up by Pharaoh Necho. So it must have been somebody that he thought would be submissive to him, because what does he then expect from Jehoiakim? That's right. So at this point, Egypt is the oppressor, and they're taking all these talents of silver and a talent of gold as tribute or taxes. And so I'm sure begrudgingly, Jehoiakim is paying this. Now, what had Jeremiah said would be the end of this Jehoahaz? So Jehoahaz only lasted 3 months. He was taken to Egypt. What had Jeremiah prophesied about him? Go ahead, Jesse.
That he would not return to Jerusalem, but would die in the place where he was led captive, which would be Babylon.
Okay. He would not return. And so we see that fulfilled. Jeremiah 22 is kind of a key passage for understanding the fate of these captivity kings. And so he goes into Egypt, and he does not return, just like it was prophesied. By the way, I've got a picture here that I grabbed off the internet of the destruction of Jerusalem, which is coming up. I don't know that the lampstand was nearly that large. I think Moses gave some dimensions for it. I don't think it was taller than a man, but at least you can see it a little better from way in the back. But still, just a tragic sight to imagine all these things that God had commanded to be built for his name's honor and glory now being burned to the ground because they had defiled it, because the people of God had defiled it. And so we talked about these 3 phases, just some key markers to remember from the 3 phases. So that event with Pharaoh Necho is like 609. And so he appoints Jehoiakim in 609, and it's then in the 3rd year, or maybe it's about the 4th year, that 605 rolls around, and he rebels. And so that first visit of the Babylonians to Jerusalem is in 605, and he begins to serve Babylon. He's king for 11 years, lasts until about the 598 deportation. That's when Jehoiachin is going to be installed, but Jehoiachin's only on the throne for 3 months. And he actually goes out to Babylon and is taken to Babylon with these other 10,000 exiles. So the first deportation is really just a small group. That's where you get Babylon just taking the cream of the crop, and you get that story over in Daniel, where you see Daniel and his 3 friends, some excellent examples of what those cream of the crop people might have looked like. Just, they're described as handsome, capable youths who can serve in the king's palace. But he also takes a few vessels of the temple in that first deportation. So the second one, you've got Jehoiachin as kind of the key king at that phase. And then he takes all the capable workers. It's about 10,000 people. And that includes Ezekiel. And they're taken to Babylon. So it's not until 586 when Zedekiah rebels that the siege finally comes to the city, and they break it down, destroy the city, destroy the temple, and take everyone. If they're not killed, they're taken into exile into Babylon. So just some key points there about those 3 phases. Let's talk about a few things from each of those phases. So who did Pharaoh Necho install? Jehoiakim, that's right. He gave him that name. How long was Jehoiakim's reign? So it's 11 years. And, you see, if you're memorizing these dates, 605 to 598 is only about 7 years. And so that leaves about 4 years that he was king before Babylon comes, right? So he's appointed by Necho, and 4 years later, Babylon is on his doorstep. So what did Nebuchadnezzar do to Jerusalem in his days?
Besiege Jerusalem.
Okay, so yes, to some extent, I'm flipping over to Daniel because we get our best description of this in Daniel. So it's very abbreviated in 2 Kings and 2 Chronicles, but in Daniel it gives a little more detail about it, and it does mention that he besieged it in verse 1. And then what are some of the things that are taken?
Articles of the house of God.
Mm-hmm. It mentions these vessels. We're going to see those vessels again, aren't we? If you think ahead, we're going to study the book of Daniel, and you think to the last days of Daniel. Jesse, do you have something?
No, it's chapter 5.
Oh yeah, chapter 5. So chapter 5 in Daniel is the end of the Babylonian Empire, and what's Belshazzar doing to provoke God? He gets those vessels out. Says, hey, let's drink from these. Let's drink from these cups as we celebrate this feast to our God, deliberately mocking Jehovah himself. And so, yeah, it's interesting how it's the first thing, one of the first things that are taken, and then it ends up being their downfall when they are used by a foolish king. And so then you get this bit of an intro into the book of Daniel. If you look at Daniel 1 and verse 3, it says, Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, chief of the officials, to bring in some of the sons of Israel, including some of the royal family and of the nobles, youths in whom was no defect, who were good-looking, showing intelligence in every branch of wisdom, endowed with understanding and discerning knowledge, and who had ability for serving in the king's court. And he ordered him to teach them the literature and language of the Chaldeans. So we'll see how that plays out in the life of Daniel. But you can imagine being in that group. What might that feel like as a young man going off to the city of Babylon and being put into the king's service?
Terrifying.
Pretty terrifying. Maybe dealing with a lot of homesickness, wondering what's going on back home, and are things going to get better or get worse? And yet, we're going to see how they flourish, how the Lord protects them, and they're able to be very successful in the king's care. All right, question 3. What is Jehoiakim infamously known for in the story of Jeremiah? I pointed you to Jeremiah 36. So just wanted to give you a sense of who is this first king of the deportation. Good king, bad king? He's a bad king. We don't get any good kings after Josiah, which is surprising because these are sons of Josiah, and yet show no similarity to their father. So if you remember one story about Jehoiakim, what is that from Jeremiah, Dad?
He burned the scroll that Jeremiah had written with the law of the Lord on it.
That's right.
He just burned it, threw it in the fire.
Yeah, it says
he cut it up, I guess.
Yeah, he had a knife, and so he's, as something's read, you imagine this long scroll, because Jeremiah is told to write down everything that he'd been given to prophesy, which was years' worth of prophecies. So he has Baruch write it for him. I'm sure that took a while. And so then they bring it in and read it before the king, and he cuts it off, throws it in the fire. Read a little bit more, cuts it off, throws it in the fire. So they're in the winter house, and so there's a fire there keeping them warm, and they're just burning the word of God. That's the attitude of the kings of Judah at this point. Anybody remember what the kings were actually supposed to do according to Deuteronomy? What were they supposed to do with the law? They were supposed to read it, but even more, they were supposed to make their own copy of the law. I don't see anywhere in the entire Old Testament where anybody was following that law, but that was to get it into their hearts. And we might follow that same instruction. I know a friend of mine who writes the scripture to help him learn it. So just write a chapter a week. Boy, wouldn't you learn it a whole lot better when you're having to write every word? And yet he's doing the opposite. He's just burning it. Just get rid of that. What a terrible king and terrible example to his people. All right, and so in the second deportation, which begins in 598.
You didn't finish that question.
Oh, I'm sorry, what did I miss?
The second part.
Very good, thank you. What kind of a death was predicted for Jehoiakim?
He said he would be buried like a donkey.
Yeah.
Dragged out and cast outside the city, and his body would be exposed to the heat and the frost.
Right. Yeah, such a despicable man does not get a king's burial. Dragged out like a donkey. I remember one time I was at the transfer station, and somebody was they had a trailer full of dead cows, and they were just shoving some cows into the trash pile, which seems like a strange place to leave a dead cow, but there was no ceremony.
Where was this?
This is at the transfer station here at the southern side of town where you can take your trash. But, pushing these dead cows around with a backhoe or whatever is disgusting. And that's the idea. It's just like, what do you do with a dead donkey? You tie a rope around his legs and drag him out where you need to put him. And they did the same with this king. And so we don't have a record of his death, but we believe that this, I'm sure, transpired. You have a bit of a harmonization required because 2 Chronicles says that King Nebuchadnezzar bound him with bronze chains to take him to Babylon. But it's interesting that it doesn't say, and he took him, right? So he bound him, but we don't have any record of him ever going to Babylon. It seems that he died the year of 598 when they were being besieged this second time. And so he dies likely in Jerusalem and is discarded like a donkey. So it's his son who's put in place, Jeconiah, and we don't know if he was age 8 when he became king or age 18. We've got both numbers in the Bible. There may be a suggestion that he is quite young because when it says he goes out to the king, who goes with him? Did you notice when he goes out to the king?
His mom.
His mother, right? Him and his mother. Now, that could certainly also be true if an 18-year-old Jeconiah went out, because the queen mother and the whole royal family is there with him. But regardless, this king doesn't remain on the throne very long. He's on the throne for 3 months. And how does his short reign end?
Well, Nebuchadnezzar took him to Babylon.
He surrenders himself and his household, basically.
It's interesting, isn't it? This, of all the kings, he's the only one who does what he's supposed to do. Now, he's described as wicked, so that doesn't mean he's a good man, but Jeremiah had been telling them that they needed to do what? Surrender. They need to fall away to the Babylonians. Go out to the Babylonians, and what will you get in return? Your life. At least you will survive. And so here you have Jeconiah, who's a young king, and he's only on the throne for 3 months, but then he surrenders. So what significant prophecy was made about Jehoiachin, or also called Jeconiah? Sorry, I've been mixing those terms, and hopefully it's not too confusing, but the scripture does use all these names for him. Jehoiachin, which is similar to Jehoiakim, but also Jeconiah, which is sometimes shortened to Coniah, all referring to the same man. And so what was prophesied about his descendants? We touched on this in a prior lesson.
He wouldn't have any.
Right. Goes back to Jeremiah 22. Remember, Jeremiah 22 has kind of the fate of all these kings. And it says, write this man down childless, and he would not have a descendant on the throne of David. And so this is the end of Davidic kings sitting on a throne in Jerusalem. Because we know the throne's about to be destroyed, the whole city's about to be destroyed, and when the return comes, he's not going to reinstate this Davidic line of kings sitting on the throne. But who does the Christ ultimately come through?
The lineage of David.
It does come through the lineage of David. And which of these kings that we're discussing today are in his lineage? Did you notice? You can flip to Matthew 1 if you'd like to look at the genealogy, but it is Jehoiachin, right? And so this Coniah is the great-great-great-grandfather of Jesus. And so Jehoiakim, his father, and then Jehoiachin or Jeconiah, the son, they are in the lineage of Christ. And so we talked about how do we reconcile this. So he's never going to have a son to sit on the throne of David in Jerusalem. That's the prophecy. And so does Jesus sit on the throne of David in Jerusalem?
It's not a problem unless you're a premillennialist.
Exactly. If you are a premillennialist, which is a broad term for a lot of ideas, but one of those big ideas is Jesus is coming back to sit on the throne in Jerusalem, on the throne of David, because David hasn't gotten that son sitting on his throne yet, so somebody's got to do it. That's not at all the fulfillment of those prophecies. Jesus is on his eternal throne. He went to the right hand of the Father and sat down. And that's described as the throne of David in a figurative sense. Acts chapter 2 is one place where that's described. Okay? So yes, Jeconiah, yeah, Randy.
I would like to say one thing real quickly about the age. In
Okay.
2 Chronicles 36 and verse 9, it says that he was 8 years old,
Mm-hmm.
but it also said he did evil in the sight of the Lord. And it's very difficult for me to think that an 8-year-old person would do that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you know, there's a lot of commentary about that age.
Yeah, that's a good point. When trying to determine which of these is probably the right number and which was maybe a scribal error, the fact that it points out the evil he's doing. We made that point about age with, was it Josiah? That, you know, he became king at age 8, but he began to seek the Lord at age 16. And so probably too young at age 8 to be making good versus evil decisions. So yeah, it's a good point. It's probably more the 18 number, which is over in 2nd Chronicles. All right. So question 5, how is Jeconiah treated at the end of his life in Babylon?
Pretty well.
He was released from prison and prominent seat with the king who was with him in Babylon.
Okay. And this is kind of the epilogue of 2 Kings. So the very end of 2 Kings is kind of the happy ending for Jehoiachin, which is surprising, right? He's mentioned as doing evil in the sight of the Lord, but this would have been decades into their captivity because of the Babylonian king that's mentioned here, and the amount of time says it's the 37th year of the exile of Jehoiachin. So he's almost into his 4th decade of being exiled. And then he is restored to a position of prominence, even in the Babylonian Empire. And so he's now in the king's presence regularly all the days of his life and has a regular allowance, a portion for each day. To me, it stands out as, if you do what God said to do, look, this is the outcome. Even though he was a wicked man, he did the one simple thing that Jeremiah had said to do, which was go and surrender yourself to the enemy, because this destruction is coming from God. And so when he does that, he says, as Jeremiah had said, you'll have your life as a booty. You'll save your life. And this exile, yes, it was going to be long, but it wasn't necessarily going to be bad for you, right? You're able to live in captivity before God. And so Jeconiah or Jehoiakim experiences that firsthand. Any thoughts or questions on that one? All right, question 6. We're still in this second deportation. What classes of people were taken into Babylon in this phase?
Pretty much everybody except the poor.
Well, in the second phase, it's not quite that deep. You get to that full deportation in the third phase. I think that's 586. And it is a little difficult to distinguish because in our Bibles it doesn't say, and this was the second deportation. It would be nice if it did, but we're trying to make some sense out of it. I believe it's in 2nd Chronicles. So, sorry, I'm flipping. I'm sure you are too. What classes of people did you guys get for this one?
Well, the warriors were the men of valor,
Mm-hmm.
the craftsmen and the smiths, and also King Jehoiachin and his mother and wives, officers, and the mighty of the land.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And so you've got, he mentions the number 10,000. That's the number I was just looking for, and I'm failing to find it in my skimming.
Kings 24, verse 14.
Thank you. 2 Kings 24, did you say?
Yeah.
Verse 14. Yep. 10,000 captives. He's got 10,000 captives. We don't know if he's adding these other groups to that 10,000, but it seems like a description of the 10,000. These mighty men of valor, craftsmen, smiths. So the logic here is, Nebuchadnezzar wants to bring all the talent back to his land so they can aid in obviously many of his construction projects and his armies and everything else. So he's taking the real value out of the nation. One of the things that's then lamented, right, is as we read Lamentations and these other Psalms is, where are the young men? Where are the leaders? They're all gone. Imagine being in the land when all the talent, all the people who run the show and take care of business are gone. It would have been very depressing and devastating. So Ezekiel is in this group, so it's just good to understand that. And so I wanted you to flip over to Ezekiel. I meant to put Ezekiel 1 through 3 on the handout, but the beginning of the book of Ezekiel, which I hope we get a week to spend on, where do we find him?
He's in Babylon.
He's in Babylon. Where does it say specifically?
By the river Chebar.
Yep, the river Chebar. So that's a place in Babylon where they've placed these exiles. And it says that he's among the exiles. So he is, what's his profession?
It says he was a priest.
That's right. And so he's one of the priests and taken in this group, and he's among the exiles, and then we'll see kind of the prophesying that he does to the exiles, where you essentially have Daniel in the king's court prophesying to the king, and then you also have Ezekiel out among the exiles a few years later, right? But also contemporary with Daniel prophesying to the people. It's interesting how God stations his mouthpieces. All right, question 7. How long was Zedekiah? So Zedekiah is now installed by the Babylonians. Another son of Josiah. So he's uncle to Jeconiah. Jeconiah was actually a grandson. Now he installs the uncle, who's another son of Josiah, Zedekiah. How long was he submissive?
9 years.
Yeah, about 9 years, and then he rebels. And so never, I'm sure, wanting to be subject to Babylon, but doing it begrudgingly and then thinking, okay, maybe he has an opportunity here, so then he rebels. But no, that's what leads to then the final destruction. Jeremiah, of course, has a relationship with Zedekiah and with all the kings. It's noted over in 2 Chronicles 36 that he did not humble himself before Jeremiah the prophet, who spoke for the Lord. That's 2 Chronicles 36, verse 12. And so Jeremiah's telling him what to do, and he won't do it. He won't humble himself before him. So what do we learn about Zedekiah from the private conversation he has with Jeremiah over in Jeremiah 38? It's a pretty interesting amount of detail. This is right after Jeremiah's been thrown in the pit and pulled back out of the pit. Clarissa?
Well, he's a weak king. He's fearful of his people, and then he's fearful of what Jeremiah is saying.
Yeah.
And he's wishy-washy in how he even deals with Jeremiah. And then he talks to him after all of that and says, tell me, about he asked what God says, but he wouldn't heed the warning or yield to it. And then he was like, and if anyone asks, say you were doing something else.
Yeah, don't tell him what you told me. Yeah, he gets this private conversation, and your point about him being a weak king, he's concerned. Jeremiah has told him. First, Jeremiah's like, if I tell you, are you going to kill me? So he has obviously that track record. Yeah, he's killed some of the mouthpieces of God in the past. And then when he agrees not to kill him, he tells him the truth of what he needs to do. And basically, you need to go out. You need to surrender, just like the last guy did. But he said, what's he afraid of if he surrenders? Who's he worried about abusing him? It's interesting. It's his own people. There's already some Jews over there in that camp who've already surrendered. And if I surrender, they may turn me over to them and they're going to abuse me. So he's afraid of his own people. He's obviously afraid of the Babylonians. He's unwilling to do what God said. And Jeremiah has given him very clear instructions and told him, if you don't, it's going to get really, really bad. He's still sitting in a walled city of Jerusalem with all of its grandeur, all of its houses and buildings, and of course the temple of God. But he says, if you don't do this, it's all going to be burned. It's all going to be destroyed. Basically, it's up to you, Zedekiah, to keep us from being ultimately destroyed.
I think it's an illustration of the truth of Proverbs 29:25. Whoever, the fear of man brings a trap or a snare, but whoever trusts the Lord shall be safe. And he allowed his fears of men and circumstances to outweigh his fear and reverence of God and his word.
Absolutely. Have other kings been in a similar situation to Zedekiah? I'm thinking of Hezekiah. Remember who was surrounding Jerusalem at that time? It was the Assyrians. And they're on the wall and they're reading their taunts that they want everyone to hear in their native tongue. And, then he spreads that letter out before the Lord in trust and humility that, God, you're the only one who can save us. And they're spared because God can defeat any army. And so Zedekiah is certainly a far cry from that level of faith. What were the prophecies about Zedekiah's end, and then how were those things fulfilled? He doesn't do what Jeremiah said, so it's not going to end well for him. But what were some of those prophecies?
Said he would take into captivity, but he wouldn't see it.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? He's going to go into captivity, but he won't see it. He's going to go to Babylon, but not see it. How did that end up being fulfilled?
He witnessed his children being executed, and then they took out his
They
eyes.
put out his eyes. That's right. These nations of the world knew how to humiliate a man, right? And that's exactly what they're doing. They are devastating the end of his days. Yeah, he's going to get to live on. He goes in bronze fetters to Babylon, but he goes blind. And the very last thing he had seen with his eyes was the death of his sons. And so just a bitter end. That which was prophesied about him certainly does come true. All right, question 9. And the bell's about to ring, so we'll spend a little bit of time on this next week. But the book of Lamentations is coupled with Jeremiah on the same scroll, typically, according to the way the Old Testament was laid out. It's this lament written by Jeremiah about the devastation that comes on Judah. I want you to spend a little bit of time thinking about that. So you have another week. So if you haven't read Lamentations yet, read it. There's also these 3 captivity psalms that express the feelings of the people when they consider all that has been lost. And it's worth our time to consider those emotions and to consider if I want to bring that upon myself. Should I obey the Lord, or should I turn away from the Lord? It should be a great warning for us to remain faithful to God. All right. Thank you, everyone.